Well, good morning. I'm Josh Shook. Today we're going to take you through a pork carcass fabrication demonstration, otherwise known as a pig puzzle. I have a PhD in food science from Oklahoma State University, and I also have a CCS, or Certified Culinary Scientist accreditation from the Research Science Association. So with those 2 degrees, blend the culinary arts with the science background of muscle biology, which helped me in my field to continue down the road of developing new products specifically for food service and daily applications. Today, we'll go through this demonstration. In front of me, we have a pork carcass. This is 1/2 of an intact carcass. This side would go about 100 to 110 pounds. The mirror image, again, would be 100 to 110 pounds as well, which would make a carcass weight of about 220, which is pretty typical in the industry. Going through the pieces we have laid out here on the table, on this end would be our shoulder end, where the head would have been located, which has already been removed. What is left is what we refer to as the jowl or the cheek meat. And then we have an intact shoulder, which still contains the neck bones, the front foot, the Boston butt, and the picnic shoulder. Moving to the middle, which is our primary value cuts, where most of the money and the most expensive portion of the animal would be located. We have the loin, we have the belly, we have back ribs, we have spare ribs, as well as tenderloins and sirloins. So again, a lot of the retail cuts that you're familiar with, and as well as some of the restaurant cuts, come from this middle. And then lastly, on this end, we have the ham, or commonly referred to as the leg. In this cut, we have the hind foot, the ham, as well as the tail. We can use a portion of this if we were to remove all the bones and make it boneless, which would then be converted into a number of our lunch meat type items. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do to break down this carcass would be to remove the entire front shoulder. To do this, we're going to locate the ribs, and we're going to work to leave 2 ribs on the entire front shoulder, and the remaining ribs will be left in the center portion of the cavity. To do this, we'll use a saw, and we'll break 90 degrees to the backbone, which will result in a square cut shoulder, which we will then take and begin the breakdown process to where we will yield a picnic as well as our Boston butt. The first thing we're going to do for this shoulder is we're going to remove the front hock as well as the front foot. To do so, we're going to make a straight cut that is 90 degrees to the bone to remove the entire front foot unit. After we have made that cut, we're going to come below and make an additional cut, which will yield a hock from the front foot as well as a front foot by itself. So now we have a whole intact front foot, which can be used for various applications. And then lastly, we will have a small hock, which then again can be used in a number of applications, specifically used in a lot of seasoning, smoked applications for an ingredient that will be used to season various products along the way. So this would be the resulting front foot. From here, it has a number of applications. One of the most common applications would be in retail, where we can actually take a saw and split this foot in half. We have split feet, which then can be sold in retail at your local grocery store. This is also the foot that would be utilized when pickling feet. So the jar of pickled pig's feet that you can pick up at your local grocers, again, would utilize this cut as well. And lastly, we sell a number of these in the export market overseas. Secondly, we have the hock. Most commonly, this cut is used to be smoked. From there, it can be included in a number of recipes to add a nice savory flavor and smoke flavor, typically used in things such as green beans, greens, baked beans, etc. So that is the most common way. We can also do this fresh in a retail application so that you could braise this down and remove a lot of the connective tissue and yield some pretty savory meat in there as well. So the next thing we're going to remove off of the front shoulder would be the jowl. This is the cheek of the animal. So when we remove the head during the harvest process, we leave the actual cheek or lower jowl attached to the carcass, and this will be what we'll remove next. We'll remove that by making a straight cut so that we square up the shoulder and yield one intact jowl. This would be our jowl skin-on version. We can do a number of things with skin-on jowls, which can be smoked and utilized as an ingredient in a number of applications for adding flavor and smoke to various recipes. We can actually also take and we can skin this and make a skinless jowl, and then we can cure it and smoke it much like we would bacon, which would result in what we would call jowl bacon. It's a little bit more porky in flavor than traditional bacon, but again, a very unique flavor that offers a little bit of a difference when comparing it to regular bacon. We also sell these fresh for a number of applications, and then also we have a number of processors that will use these as adding additional flavor boost and porky notes to ground meats such as sausages. So this can be used as an ingredient in various sausage applications as well. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the neck bone. This neck bone is probably one of the most difficult things to remove from the carcass. And then from there, we'll have a complete neck bone that we can utilize for a number of applications. While removing the neck bone, we want to make sure that we leave little meat on the neck bone and most of the meat associated with the shoulder. Again, we're working with a Boston butt and a picnic that's underneath this bone, so we want to make sure that we're cutting in a way that does not disrupt or slice into those major primals. So this would be a complete neck bone. Sell these in a couple of different ways. Generally speaking, we can smoke this whole, and then we'll cut it up into large cubes, which can then be used as an ingredient, again, adding flavor to a number of recipes. We can also sell this product fresh, either whole in this state, or we could chunk it up again into fresh chunks, which can then be used in a braising application so that you can recover a lot of the meat off of these associated bones. Some individuals are a little concerned or shy away from neck bones, but again, the meat here is associated with the Boston butt. So again, it's a high quality meat that can be used in a number of recipes and dishes. So from here, we will take the shoulder after the neck bones have been removed. We're going to make a single cut to separate the square cut bone-in Boston butt from the bone-in picnic. We'll start with a knife cut, and from there, we'll have to use a saw to finish cutting through the bone. Once we have made that cut, we have a bone-in, square-cut Boston butt that still has the skin on. And we also have a bone-in, skin-on picnic. All right, what we have left is the bone-in, square-cut Boston butt. This is the premium meat that is used in most barbecue applications. Many pit masters are very concerned with using the most flavorful meat that they possibly can. When evaluating a bone-in butt, most prefer the bone-in because they believe the bone adds a source of flavor that you can't get if it has been removed. And then secondly, once the butt has reached a temperature that is good for pulling and making barbecue, the bone will actually slide completely out of the product. So it's kind of a good temperature or a doneness gauge that they utilized. Secondly, a lot of pit masters will visually inspect their butts for what they refer to as the money muscle, which is this muscle associated right here. Again, they're looking for money muscles that are very wide, very long, full of marbling, as well as nice color. This is the most premium portion of the entire butt and makes the most flavorful components of the barbecue. And then lastly, some barbecue joints and restaurants will actually use a boneless butt. So from here, we can actually skin this butt and take the scapula out to yield a boneless butt. We'll start by removing the skin. The skin will be removed, leaving as little fat on the skin as possible, leaving most of the fat on the butt itself. Fat is flavor, so leaving fat on the butt helps make the product more flavorful during the cooking process. Skins can be sold for a number of applications. Most commonly is pork rinds, where you can actually take and remove most of the fat associated with this skin, dry and fry the skin down, which then turns into pork rinds, which are sold in a number of retail applications. Next, we'll remove the blade bone or the scapula. All right, to remove the blade bone, we'll start by filleting on top of the blade bone. The portion of the blade bone that sets up top or closest to myself is actually flat, so we can fillet in there, staying really close to the bone so that we don't leave any meat on the bone. And then we will hook around underneath the bone, and then the scapula actually contains a ridge or a bump on the bottom side that we have to cut up and around, which will allow us to leave as little meat on the bone as possible, resulting in the most meat within the boneless butt as possible. From there, we'll have a bone that is nice and clean with limited trim on the bone. So what we have here is the whole bone-in, skin-on picnic shoulder. There's not a tremendous amount of use in food service for these. However, they are used quite often in retail, primarily smoked. Generally speaking, for a food service application, these would be skinless and then boneless. So from here, we'll take and we'll remove the skin, taking care again to leave as much fat and lean on the picnic as possible with minimal on the skin. Again, with this being the lower portion of the shoulder that is associated with the foot, there's a little bit more connective tissue associated with a picnic than a Boston butt. Therefore, this product needs a little bit longer of a cooking time, as well as a little bit more moist cooking environment to help break down some of the connective tissue associated with the movement of the front leg. Sure, we're leaving as little meat on the bone as possible and maximizing the amount of lean associated with the boneless picnic. So once we have the bone removed, all we have left is lean meat and some associated fat. Again, we talked about the amount of connective tissue that is associated with the lean in the picnic, requiring more of a moist braising type environment to break that down to make it tender. Additionally, from here, we can actually come in and remove what we refer to as the picnic cushion. This is a leaner portion of the picnic, which allows us to harvest a leaner, more tender piece of meat out of the picnic, which can then be used for some various applications that are different than what we would traditionally use a whole boneless picnic for. So again, this would be a boneless picnic cushion. Lean point is a lot leaner than the whole boneless picnic, and therefore it lends itself to a variety of applications that are different than what we would use a whole boneless picnic for. The remaining boneless picnic can be used for a number of applications. One of the most common is sausage manufacturing. So we can actually grind this up to make a various number of sausages, whether it's hot dogs, smoked sausages, various frankfurters, bratwurst, etc. This meat lends itself well to grinding and adding a large amount of flavor and fat to products where it is needed. So the next cut that we'll make in the further processing of this pork carcass would be to remove the ham. To remove the ham, we're going to make a straight cut, leaving about 1 inch of ham meat in front of the H-bone. which is the center of the pelvis, which will yield a complete green bone-in ham with the hind foot and the tail associated. We've already gone ahead and made that cut here clean for the ease of demonstration purposes. So from here, we will take and we will remove the hind foot just below the hock joint. Hind feet are primarily used in export applications to be sent overseas, with very little use in the retail application in the U.S. So from here we have a complete whole hind foot. Next, for the ham, we will remove the tail. The tail is the last portion of the vertebrae associated with the loin. We will remove the tail, leaving as little lean on the tail as possible, maximizing the amount of lean we leave on the ham. Tails can be used in a number of applications, from retail all the way through our export operations. So what we have here is a bone-in, skin-on ham. There are some minimal uses in food service for a whole fresh ham, but generally speaking, most of these are used in a boneless format. So to get to a boneless format, the first thing we're going to have to do is skin the ham. Again, we'll remove the skin, leaving as much lean and fat on the ham as possible. Skin, again, sold for several applications. Most commonly is edible pork skins in the form of pork rinds, but we can also use skins to harvest gelatin. Skins are very high in gelatin, which can be used in a number of food applications for setting various sauces. So we can extract the gelatin from the skin as well. So once we have the ham skin removed, the next step will be to remove the H-bone, or otherwise known as the pelvis. To do that, we'll make a cut on either side of the H-bone, looking for the joint, the hip joint that is associated with the ball of the femur. Once we have the femur broke away from the pelvis, just simply scoop out underneath the flat bone to remove it, leaving as little lean on the bone as possible. From here, we'll remove the femur to start yielding our three major boneless ham muscles. First initial cut will separate our knuckle, which is the muscles associated with this portion of the ham, from the inside, which is on top of the ham. Can also be referred to as the top because it sits on top of the ham as it sits on a table, but most commonly is referred to as the inside. Once we have the femur loose, we will carry the cuts down to remove the rest of the bone and associated shank meat. From here, we have a boneless ham. This ham is comprised of three major muscles. The inside, which is on top of the ham. We have the knuckle, which is the group of muscles associated over here that work in conjunction with the kneecap. And then on the bottom next to the table is what we call the outside or the bottom flat. To continue to separate these muscles, we will cut at the natural seams to separate the inside from the outside, as well as the knuckle from the outside. We'll first start by removing the knuckle. So now we have the knuckle removed, as well as removing the little kneecap that was left. Next, we'll remove the inside. And then lastly, we have the outside left, which contains what we refer to as the light and dark butt, which is the cap off of the sirloin where we made the ham break earlier. We will remove that, which can be later utilized in trimmings. And then at the base of the outside, we have a portion of the shank muscle. We refer to that as the outside shank, which will be removed. So from here, we have the three primary muscles of a boneless ham. We start with the knuckle. The knuckle is a round, smaller group of muscles compared to the inside and the outside. Traditionally, this is more reddish in color, but also has some two-toning to it. So one side of the muscle is a little bit more of a palish pink color versus a darker red on the inside. When utilizing this for various boneless products, you have to keep that in mind, as the resulting finished product will have a little bit of a color variation in the product once it has been fully cooked. For that reason, this product typically is less costly in value compared to the other two items, which are used primarily for more premium type items. So we have the inside muscle, which is kind of a heart-shaped muscle, and then we also have the outside. These are the two muscles that are most commonly used in premium lunch meats because they have a much more uniform color as well as a much more uniform texture and tenderness. You can use these in conjunction with each other or independently, putting insides back with insides, or you can use outsides with outsides or any combination thereof. If you're looking for a whole boneless ham application, we would then actually use all three parts and further process those to put them back together, utilizing all the components to yield a complete whole boneless ham. All right, one of the last cuts that we can make from the outside is to remove the thumb muscle, or what we refer to as the ham eye. To remove this, we'll just separate this round muscle that looks a lot like a tenderloin once removed and trimmed properly. Once we trim the external fat off of the ham eye, we have a nice round piece of meat that can be used for a number of applications, but traditionally it is used by slicing into small medallions. And then these medallions can then be bacon wrapped or grilled or braised in a number of applications, which offer a very nice fillet option for a piece of meat that can be a little bit of an economic choice in comparison to a pork tenderloin. So the final piece we have here is the middle. This is where most of the value cuts are associated. We have the loin, which is still in a bone-in format. We have the ribs, which we will then separate here in just a minute, as well as the belly. So to separate the loin from the belly, which will then also delineate our back ribs from our spare ribs. To do that, we're going to make a cut down the center, just through the ribs, so that we can then remove the belly, leaving the ribs associated with the belly as well as the back ribs associated with the loin. Once we break through the bones, we will then take and remove the bone-in loin, leaving the fat associated with the loin attached to the belly. Most of this is now done automatically with machines, so it's a little difficult to do by hand, but we'll do the best we can to try to remove as much fat from the loin as possible, leaving it associated with the belly and the back fat. So from here, we would have a whole bone-in pork loin, and then we would have a belly with the associated ribs, which are now the spare ribs, and then we have what we would refer to as back fat on this side. And then again to the bone-in loin, the ribs associated with the bone-in loin are now referred to as back ribs. From the belly, now that we have it separated from the loin, bone-in loin are now referred to fat, which is the fat that was associated with the loin. We have the remaining ribs, which are the spare ribs, and then the underlying meat is the belly. First thing that we're going to do is we'll actually remove the back fat, leaving just a small strip of fat along the edge of the belly. Here we have the back fat. This fat can be skinless or skin on. This is still skin on, but you can use the fat as just that, as fat for various recipes or including it into grinds to fatten up various sausage recipes, or we can leave it skin on, or we can salt it, and then at that point it becomes salted fat back, which can be used as a ingredient for flavor in a number of recipes. Next, we'll remove the full sheet of spare ribs, trying to leave a nice layer of lean on the ribs. Again, there's a lot of marbling associated with the belly. Therefore, there's a lot of marbling that can be associated with the ribs. So we'll make a fillet cut that will remove the ribs, trying to leave a little bit of lean on the ribs so that we have meaty spare ribs, but not taking too much lean to the point where we damage our belly and we cannot make premium bacon. From here, we have a full rack of ribs. These are spare ribs, which is the traditional, most commonly seen rib up until recent years. But more commonly now, or starting to gain attraction, is what we refer to as a St. Louis rib. And a St. Louis rib is actually where we take this rib and we cut it into a square cut, and we will address that in just a few minutes. What's remaining is a full fresh pork belly, primarily used for bacon manufacturing. This would be cured and then smoked and then sliced into various thicknesses for what is commonly referred to as bacon in this country. We can also do a number of fresh applications where we can do just fresh pork side, which is gaining popularity in the food service arena. As something that can be braised down to render a lot of the fat out of the belly, which leaves a very highly marbled lean, which can be very flavorful and very tender when cooked properly. Also, we can use this to make lardones or various bacon bit products as well, which are typically byproducts of the smoking process. Pieces that don't necessarily go into full slices can then be used to generate bacon bits. From this fresh pork belly, we can also generate what we refer to as a center cut fresh pork belly. This is getting after the center portion of the belly, which is the most consistent in thickness, as well as shape, marbling, and texture. Once we get down on the ends of the belly, on the shoulder end as well as the ham end, we start to pick up some secondary associated muscles, which are just make the shape a little bit less consistent, which requires a little bit more technique when cooking because there's some inconsistent cooking times due to inconsistent thickness. So to eliminate that issue, we can create a center cut fresh pork belly that can then be used in various applications. To do so, we will remove the flank end of the belly, as well as the shoulder end. We will square up the bottom to remove a little bit of the belly fat, as well as square up top also. From here, we have a very consistent shape and size of fresh pork belly that's going to cook very consistent and uniform and can be used in a number of applications for braised bellies or any other creative opportunities for pork belly. What we have here is the full spare rib, which up until just a few years ago was the most popular form of spare rib shape and size. But due to a greater demand for consistency and usability at the food service level, another cut has become about, which we refer to as a St. Louis cut. In order to get a St. Louis cut, we're actually going to remove the base of the rib so that we get a nice square cut shape where we can actually cut between every one of the ribs so that if we want to portion it into 2 or 3 bone racks, we can. We could sell it as half racks or we could sell it as a full rack. If we did not remove what we refer to as the breastbone on the hard bone down on the bottom side, we would not be able to cut through the ribs, therefore making it very hard to portion at a user level. So to do so, we'll actually take it, we'll square it up to where the breastbone actually meets the base of the ribs and the cartilage. We'll make a square cut the length of the table, removing the entire breastbone. Once the breastbone is removed, we'll go to the flank end. We will square the flank end up. Once we are complete, we will have a nice rectangular shaped rib that we can then cook whole and portion into individual portions if we need to, or we could sell the whole rack as a full and intact rack. So from a St. Louis rib, we have a number of reasons why it is more user-friendly than the traditional full spare rib. One is the overall consistent size, shape, and weight as the product comes into the unit. This ensures that your cooking times are very uniform from piece to piece. It also allows you to present product to the table that is very uniform and consistent from plate to plate, table to table. And then lastly, it also allows you to understand your food costs much more easily due to the fact that the product is very consistent in weight. So all pieces and sizes are the same as they come in and go out. So what we have here is a full bone-in loin. From here we can get a number of bone-in products. If we start on this end and we were to actually make slices and cut this into steaks, these would be referred to as what blade chops or blade steaks on this end. Would include about the first 4 ribs. And then through the middle section, from the 4th rib back to generally the last rib, these chops would be center cut bone-in chops. And then once we get back towards the rear of the loin, where you can see the tenderloin starting to appear, the first portion of the tenderloins, where the tenderloin is the smallest, would be referred to more as a T-bone chop. So a T-bone would have a very small amount of the tenderloin muscle associated with it. And then on back towards the rear, whereas the tenderloin muscle gets much larger, these would be referred to as porterhouse chops. And then once we get to the very end, we would have sirloin chops, which we could make as bone-in chops as well. But for today's purposes, we're going to bone this loin out into the various components. So we'll create a tenderloin, a sirloin, we'll create a boneless rib end, as well as a boneless center cut loin. And then once we get the bones removed, the rib rack that is left will be our baby back ribs. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the tenderloin. This is the most tender muscle in the entire carcass. Therefore, from an eating experience, it is the most premium eating experience. So this would be a whole, fresh pork tenderloin, which can be cooked in many of applications, grilling, in the oven, cut into medallions for stovetop, wrapped in bacon, diced up and used in various skillet meals, etc. Very versatile, very high quality piece of meat. Next, we'll remove the sirloin. From here, we have a bone-in sirloin roast, which can be roasted in the oven or braised down slow. Additionally, it can be cut into chops for bone-in sirloin chops as well. You can also remove these bones to make a boneless sirloin roast, which can be used in a number of applications from grilling to oven. Next, we'll start the removal of the back ribs and the bones. From here, we have the bones that have been removed. As you can see, the back ribs are still associated with the spinal column, but you flip over here and you can actually see the back ribs. If we had the saw available, we would take and then run a saw directly down here where the ribs connect to the spine, and that would separate this rack of ribs from the spinal column, which would give us our back ribs. And the next, we have a boneless loin. The sirloin has already been removed, so we'll come up, we'll remove the shoulder end to create a small shoulder or rib, small rib roast, which can be used in a number of applications. And then lastly, we have a strap-on boneless center cut loin. This can be used in a number of ways, from loin roasts all the way to pork chops cut in various thicknesses, butterflied chops, kebabs, a number of applications suitable for grilling, braising, stir frying, pan searing, all of the above. Just the most versatile pork cut in the entire carcass. So from the strap-on boneless center cut loin, we can have multiple applications here. So traditionally, we can cut pork chops from this loin, leaving the strap on, which is going to yield a pork chop that looks very similar to this, where we actually have the tail, which is also what we refer to as the strap, still associated with the pork chop. Very flavorful piece of meat. However, it can be a little bit fatty, and some consumers may prefer not to see it. If so, we can actually do a strap-off loin, where we would remove the strap, which would allow a center cut pork chop to not have the strap muscle and would be more in line with what is traditionally seen and sold in the retail format at most grocery stores. So again, strap-on pork chop contains the tail. A strap-off pork chop would not contain the tail, and it would just be the center loin muscle. So this concludes our demonstration of the pig puzzle today. As you can see here, we have utilized the entire carcass, and we truly do use everything but the squeal. So we hope you picked up some pointers or some tips during the demonstration today. If you happen to have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to your Smithfield Foods sales rep or contact, as we'll be happy to address those. As for me, I'm Josh Shook with Smithfield Foods, and thank you for joining us.